Chevrolet killed this name once already, and there are engineers inside General Motors who still argue that reviving it a second time was reckless. That argument is exactly why we need to talk about it. I'm bringing you this one because it sits right at the center of what we do here at Automotive Pulse, where the goal has never been to just read off numbers. It's to understand what a car is actually trying to say about the people who built it and the people it's built for. And this one has a lot to say. Before we get into the sound of it, or the way it sits on the road, there's a single decision buried in the engineering of this car that GM's own performance division reportedly debated for months. A choice that trades a small amount of straight-line bragging rights for something almost nobody else in this segment is willing to sacrifice anymore. We'll get to why that decision matters more than it sounds like it should. Chevrolet's next-generation Chevelle SS 427 is not a reimagining in the soft, watered-down sense that word usually implies. It is being positioned internally. According to industry reporting and design language patterns, Chevrolet has been laying down for years as a legacy revival built with a completely modern engineering spine underneath a silhouette that refuses to apologize for where it came from. The proportions alone tell you that before a single word is spoken about horsepower, the hood is long, low, and deliberately unbothered by aerodynamic trends that would soften its edges into something forgettable. The character line running down the flank isn't decoration. It's a structural signal, a way of telling your eye exactly where the mass of this car lives and exactly how it intends to move that mass. The stance is wide and planted, the kind of width that isn't about looking aggressive for a camera. It's about communicating confidence at rest before the engine has even turned over. The quad-circle lighting signature up front is the most emotionally loaded design choice on the entire car, a direct handshake with Chevelles from decades ago, executed now with sharp, modern optics that feel less like nostalgia and more like a promise being kept. Out back, the same four-circle language repeats, glowing in a way that feels less like a taillight and more like a signature. The gold-accented trim running along the beltline and through the lower fascia isn't there to be flashy for its own sake. It's there to draw a hard line between this car and every blacked-out, murdered-out interpretation of muscle that's crowded the segment over the last decade. This one wants to be seen in daylight. Under that long hood sits the piece of engineering that's caused the most internal debate, and it's not the horsepower number. It's the choice to keep this platform rear-wheel drive only, no all-wheel drive variant offered at launch, at a moment when nearly every high-output performance car from Detroit is migrating toward all-wheel grip for the sake of quicker 60-foot times. Chevrolet's performance engineers reportedly pushed back against adding a front axle to this platform, arguing that the Chevelle name has never stood for manageable, computer-mediated grip. It stood for a driver managing power with their own hands and feet. That's the subtle compromise sitting right at the heart of this car. It will not out-launch a car with power sent to all four corners. It was never meant to. It was built to reward someone who wants to feel the rear tires negotiate with the pavement, rather than have that negotiation handled invisibly on their behalf. The engine feeding that rear axle is expected to be a supercharged 7.0-liter V8, an evolution of GM's small block architecture, internally targeted at somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 to 1,000 horsepower, paired with a 9-speed automatic as the volume transmission, and a 6-speed manual reportedly still fighting to survive the final approval process. Torque delivery is engineered to arrive early and stay flat, the kind of low-end shove that doesn't need to be chased through the rev range. To be felt, starpom on a car like this isn't a formality, it's an announcement. The supercharger winds to life a half-second before the exhaust catches, and then the whole car settles into an idle that isn't smooth in the refined sense. It's a controlled, low-frequency shudder you feel through the seat before you feel it through your ears. Roll into the throttle, and there's a brief mechanical inhale as the blower spools, followed by a wall of induction noise layered directly on top of a deep chest-level exhaust note that doesn't get thin or strained as the revs climb. It gets angrier. Upshifts land with a hard, mechanical thud through the chassis, not a soft electronic blip. Lift-off between gears and the exhaust cracks and pops with an aggression that feels almost impolite in a parking garage and entirely appropriate everywhere else. Inside the cabin, sound isolation has been tuned selectively rather than aggressively. Engineers reportedly wanted road and wind noise filtered out while deliberately leaving a channel open for engine and exhaust character to reach the driver's SETI unfiltered. At high RPM, the note sharpens into something almost violent, a raw, muscular scream that never quite loses its low-end weight, which is exactly what a supercharged American V8 is supposed to sound like and almost never does anymore. Open the door and the first thing that registers isn't a feature, it's a scent. Leather that's been tanned with intention rather than sprayed with a synthetic approximation of it. The seating position sits you low and slightly reclined, bolsters that hold your torso without ever feeling like they're gripping you. The steering wheel is thick where your palms actually rest, thin enough at the rim to feel connected rather than padded into numbness. Gold-accented stitching traces the same lines the exterior trim follows, a small detail that makes the cabin feel considered rather than assembled. Ambient lighting is warm rather than clinical, more like the glow of a well-designed room than the cold blue-white of a tech showroom. The center display is integrated into the dash rather than perched on top of it like an afterthought, angled slightly toward the driver, running Chevrolet's latest software with over-the-air update capability. Adaptive driver assistance systems that stay quietly in the background until they're actually needed, and connectivity that's there to reduce friction in daily life rather than to impress anyone. None of it shouts for attention, and that's precisely the point. The cabin feels less like a list of options and more like a room you'd choose to sit in even with the engine off. The first few seconds of actual motion are where all of this either comes together or falls apart, and here it comes together. Steering weight builds naturally as speed increases, with enough road texture communicated through the wheel that you know exactly what the front tires are doing without the harshness that used to define cars like this. Throttle response is immediate but not nervous. Brake pedal feedback is firm and progressive rather than grabby, the kind of pedal that lets you modulate weight transfer instead of just stopping the car. The suspension, tuned with adaptive dampers, is composed enough for a daily commute, yet firms up convincingly the moment you ask more of it, keeping the chassis balanced through direction changes, rather than letting that long hood push wide. The seats hold you through all of it without ever feeling restrictive. There's a specific moment, somewhere around the first hard squeeze of throttle, out of a slow corner, where the rear end just barely announces itself before the tires hook back up. And that single moment tells you everything about who this car was built for. Chevrolet's projected pricing for the 427 sits in the neighborhood of $90,000 to $105,000, depending on trim and options, a number that puts it well above where the Chevelle name has historically lived. And the honest answer to whether that's worth it isn't really about materials or horsepower per dollar math. What you're actually paying for is a manufacturer choosing, in an era of easier all-wheel grip and quieter electrified powertrains, to build something that still asks something of the person behind the wheel. You're paying for a badge that means something to people who remember what it used to mean, wrapped around engineering that has genuinely moved forward instead of just repainting the past. This isn't a segment disruptor in the way a clean sheet hypercar is, and it isn't chasing a direct rival so much as it's defining its own lane, positioned as a modern muscle icon, built for people who still believe driving is supposed to feel like something, rather than simply happen around them. This is a car for someone who reads a spec sheet and immediately wants to know what the shift feels like in their hand. Someone who values the sensation of mechanical effort over the convenience of it being hidden away. Someone who sees a 6-speed manual option not as an inconvenience, but as the entire point. There's a stretch of empty 2-lane highway just outside most American cities where a car like this stops being a machine you operate and starts being a conversation you're having. Long straights giving way to sweeping bends with nothing but horizon on either side. Exactly the kind of environment this platform seems engineered around from the very first line on the drawing board. And in everyday terms, none of that comes at the cost of livability. The trunk holds real luggage. The ride doesn't punish you on a highway commute. And the safety systems work quietly enough that you forget they're there until the one moment you need them. Before we get to what this car ultimately is, I'd genuinely like to know where you land on something that doesn't have a clean answer. So subscribe if you want more honest breakdowns like this one, and tell me in the comments whether a modern muscle car like this loses something essential by skipping all-wheel drive entirely, or whether that missing front axle is actually the last honest thing left in performance engineering. The 2027 Chevelle SS 427 is what happens when a name refuses to be a museum piece and insists, instead, on still being a verb. This video is based on current automotive industry insights, publicly available information, design analysis, and reliable reporting available at the time of writing. The 2027 Chevelle SS 427 discussed here is presented as a realistic future production concept and is not an officially confirmed Chevrolet vehicle. All specifications, performance figures, pricing, features, and production timelines are estimates and projections only, subject to change, and should not be considered official until announced directly by General Motors or Chevrolet.